It didn't start with a temple. It started with a boat and silence. A silence so vast it followed you across the ocean. You were not trying to teach. You were not trying to lead. You were simply walking toward stillness, one step, one breath at a time. But the emperor wanted answers. The monks wanted methods. And your shadow wanted to move. Before you knew it, they gave you a cave. And you gave them kung fu. Not out of violence, but out of stillness too loud to sit with. Out of stillness so deep, it began to punch back. Welcome to China, Bodhidharma. The land is ancient. The tea is bitter. And the silence? The silence is not empty. It waits. Now close your eyes and follow the sound of the mountains, because the world is falling asleep, and your story is just beginning. Subscribe, like, and tell us where you're listening from and what time it is. Let's begin. The boat and the silence. It begins not with thunder, but with silence. You are on a small boat, rocking gently over the Indian Ocean. No one sings, no one prays. The sky is the color of wet stone, and the horizon forgot where it begins. You are Bodhidharma. Or at least, that's what people call you. Back in Kanchipuram, they used to whisper that you were the son of a king. Some say you left a palace. Some say you left madness. You say nothing. The waves say more than enough. Your legs are folded beneath you in perfect zazen. Your hands rest like sleeping birds. Your eyes stare without blinking at the nothing ahead. And that silence, that massive, crushing velvet silence, fills the whole sky. A fly lands on your shaved head. You do not move. It walks across your brow, puzzled by this strange mountain that does not twitch. Eventually, it gives up and flies off. This is your first victory in China, and you're not even there yet. The boat groans. A sailor coughs. One man asks if you are dead. You are not. You are breathing, very slowly, very deeply, like a mountain that hasn't decided whether to crumble or bloom. You have brought nothing with you. No texts, no money, not even sandals. Just your robes, your mind, and that massive, unbearable silence. You left your country not because you hated it, but because the sound of thinking got too loud. Everywhere you turned, someone was explaining the Dharma. Books argued with books. Tongues wrestled with tongues. The palace became a lecture hall. The temples became megaphones. But you came to listen. And silence, as it turns out, does not live in India anymore. So you followed the wind, and it dragged your boat toward the east. China. The word hangs in the air like steam. You've heard rumors. A land of poetry and porcelain. Of emperors who debate metaphysics between sips of tea. Of monks who pray by dancing. Of mountains that weep ink. Of tigers who bow. But you do not come for the land. You come because there is a rumor that silence still lives here. You want to meet it. Autumn. The sea rolls on. For days. For weeks. You eat only when the body insists. You sleep rarely. And when you do, the silence sleeps with you, curled up at your feet like a dog that's finally come home. One night, during a storm, a sailor screams that the boat will split. You do not move. The rain hits your face. The sky flashes open like a wound. But you are the same. Because you are not afraid of drowning. You are afraid of speaking. Stone. When land finally appears, it's not glorious. Just rocks. Just trees. Just a few startled birds lifting off like gossip at the sight of you. You step onto shore barefoot. The sand is cold. Your feet bleed slightly. The Emperor and the Questions. The capital is a mirror. Everything reflects. Everything echoes. Stone reflects footsteps. Silk reflects ambition. Eyes reflect other eyes, looking for something to approve of. And now, here you are, a man with no shoes, no scrolls, no retinue, and no smile, standing in the court of Emperor Wu of Liang. He is draped in crimson and gold, seated on a throne that looks more like a dragon's tongue than furniture. His beard is trimmed to absolute balance. His eyebrows composed like a brush stroke. He smells faintly of camphor and control. He leans forward with the smile of someone who's been waiting centuries to be right. So, he says, I have built temples. I have funded monasteries. I have commissioned the copying of scriptures by hand, every word bathed in incense. How much merit have I earned? His courtiers lean in, 1,000 breaths hold. You blink, then say, none. The silence is not respectful. It's shocked. The air tastes like fear. Somewhere a servant swallows too loudly. The emperor's smile curls like a paper scroll set too close to fire. None, he repeats, his voice like jade about to crack. How can that be?
You speak softly, but your words land like ink on silk, permanent and slightly too dark. All actions done with pride seek reward. That is business, not virtue. The emperor shifts. The throne creaks. The dragon does not approve. He tries again. Very well, he says. If merit is nothing, then tell me, what is the holy truth of Buddhism? You answer, vast emptiness, nothing holy. His knuckles tighten. And now the third question, the one emperors should never ask. Then who is it, he asks, who stands before me? And you smile for the first time. A soft, terrible smile. I do not know. The court dismisses you an hour later, but truly you left the moment you said none. Outside, the air feels cleaner. Your shadow stretches across the flagstones like a rope unraveling. Behind you, the emperor stares at the silk curtain.
The long road north. Your sandals never arrived, and so your souls become maps. Each step collects dust, stone, and stories that don't belong to you. You walk through forests that don't know your name, over rivers that ask no questions. Every night is a bed of leaves. Every meal is a debate between hunger and humility. The silence walks beside you, still loyal, still patient, though sometimes it sighs when your knee cracks. You are heading north. You do not know why. And that is why the road opens for you. Phi. A village appears like a yawn in the trees. The people pause their farming. They stare. Not at your skin. Many travelers are darker than the rice fields here. Not at your beard, though some children laugh at how it refuses to behave. They stare at your eyes, because your eyes do not blink. A woman offers you water. You accept it without thanks, not out of pride, but because silence is your only servant. She nods like she understands. She doesn't. But that's fine. Understanding is a cage with gold bars. You move on. A child follows for a few steps. He asks if you're a ghost. You turn to him, smile gently, and say, "Yes, but I still get hungry." The child laughs. You do not. The silence chuckles quietly to itself. Toph. The road curls like incense smoke. Mountains rise ahead, gray, stern, indifferent. Good. They remind you of yourself. One night you pass a shrine. It is small, covered in moss, forgotten by the officials, but remembered by the wind. A fox sits nearby, unmoving. Its eyes glow slightly. You bow. It does not bow back, but then again, it doesn't leave either. Sometimes that's the same thing. Ugh. A storm traps you on a cliff for 2 days. You do not curse the rain. You simply sit. Water drips from your nose. Your robe grows heavier. Your thoughts lighter. A goat watches from above. You both pretend not to be impressed by each other's stillness. At night, you sleep with one hand tucked inside your robe, and the other gently resting on the earth, as if the soil were a child afraid of being alone. 2. As the air grows colder, so do your memories. You think of your father, a king, they said, a teacher he wanted to be, a ghost he became. You remember his eyes, tired even in triumph. You remember how he said, "Winning only teaches you how to lose with pride." You didn't understand then, you still don't. But the silence does. Sometimes the silence remembers things you never lived. Boot. You pass another village. This one is different. No one comes to greet you. Doors close before you approach. You smell fear in the air, thick as the smoke of wet wood. A monk had come here once. He preached loudly. He promised things. He left with donations. You say nothing. But the villagers watch you all the same, peeking through wooden cracks as if your silence might explode. It doesn't. You just sit on a rock outside, still, breathing. A child eventually brings you a bowl of rice. She runs away before you can smile. You eat slowly, not because of etiquette, but because each grain is already perfect. Trail. The road gets thinner. Then the cave that watched you back. The mouth of the cave is not wide. It does not roar. It does not beg you to enter. It simply waits. Like a question you haven't answered. Like a question that never needed words. You stand before it for a long time. Longer than the trees think is polite. Long enough that the moss at your feet begins to wonder if you're another rock. You do not move, because silence has already entered, and it is rude to arrive after your guest. So finally, you bow, not to the cave, but to the part of yourself that agrees to disappear. Then you step inside. Darkness. Darkness greets you like an old friend pretending to have forgotten your name. You recognize its game. You do not speak. The stone walls narrow. They breathe cold. The air is thick with nothing. Not emptiness, not absence, just nothing. You sit. Your legs fold like paper birds. Your back leans ever so slightly forward. Your breath becomes the only animal here. The silence returns. But this time, it brings a second silence with it. One deeper, older, less interested in conversation. It sits opposite you, invisible, but grinning. Comet head. For the first 3 days, your body aches. The cave says nothing. You shift once. Then, never again. For the first week, you hear every sound louder. Your stomach, your heartbeat, the thoughts of ants in the stone. For the first month, you begin to forget your name. This pleases the cave. You can feel it relaxing, as if saying, "Ah, finally, no more humans." Comet Chi. Seasons pass, or maybe only clouds. You cannot tell. Because you do not leave. You do not blink. You do not move. Birds nest above the entrance. They sing each morning. You do not answer. A monk from a nearby village comes once to offer food. You say nothing. He bows. He never returns. They begin to whisper stories. That your soul left your body. That your bones turned to jade. That you are meditating so hard, the cave itself is beginning to blink. None of that is true. But none of it is false either. Because truth, like your body, is beginning to dissolve into shape, sky. In your stillness, you begin to notice something. The cave is not silent. It is listening. You feel its attention like breath on the back of your thoughts. You feel its memory, the way it remembers dinosaurs and melting ice, and a bird that died too quietly to be mourned. It remembers you now, not as a man, but as a shape in its lungs. The shadows start to shift, not because of light, but because they're tired of pretending not to move. One day, you see your own silhouette on the far wall. Perfect, sharp, like ink spilled with purpose. You did not cast it. You did not move. And yet, there it is. Your shadow has become impatient. Or maybe it has become real. T. In the stillness, dreams come, but not the soft ones. These are dreams with teeth. You dream of emperors burning scriptures, of demons drinking tea with monks, of rivers that scream your name, the eyes that wouldn't close. It begins with a blink, just one. After all these years, one moment, open, the next, a flicker. The cave notices. The silence, startled, drops a pebble. You did not mean to blink, but the body is a house with creaking floors. And the world is trying to enter again. So, the story begins. They say you ripped your eyelids off, tore them away, piece by piece, like peeling bark from a tree that wouldn't sleep. They say you flung them to the ground in rage, cursed your own weakness, and sat for 9 more years in boiling stillness. They say from those eyelids a plant grew, a bitter green shoot, curled and angry, the first tea leaf, the first truth brewed by accident. They say a lot, but the truth is simpler and stranger. You didn't tear your eyelids off. They left you, gently. One night, they simply decided, this man no longer needs us. So they slid down your cheeks like 2 silent leaves and disappeared into the soil. Plant. And yes, a plant did grow, but not out of punishment, out of permission. The cave sighed, and the earth, long still, whispered, let him taste. Tiny green teeth pushed through the ground near your knees, not humble, not proud, just awake. You leaned forward, broke your silence not with words, but with fingers, and plucked a leaf like a thought you'd been waiting to remember. You placed it on your tongue. It burned, not with fire, but with returning. For the first time in years, the world entered you again, and it did so bitterly. The tea became your only food. No rice, no fruit, just the harsh green reminder of attention. You brewed it with water collected from the cave's breath, in a bowl carved from stone and quiet. Each sip kept your eyes wide. Each sip pulled the sleep from your bones like a fisherman reeling in a ghost. You began to see things more clearly. The cracks in the cave were lines of poetry. The spider's web was a map. Your breath was a drumbeat, calling no army but your own awareness. You stared at a wall for days, months, maybe another 9 years. And, slowly, you began to understand. The wall was staring back. Brick. One night, the cave asked you, "Why do you keep looking at that wall?" You answered without lips, "It's the only thing that doesn't flinch." The cave considered this, then replied, "Neither do you." From that moment, you and the wall were no longer separate. You became its dream. It became your reflection. Your shadow stopped flickering. It began to deepen, burning itself into the stone behind you like a memory so powerful it refused to leave. Soon others would come. They would see that shadow and say, "The boy who wouldn't bow." The first time he appeared, you didn't notice. He stood just beyond the mouth of the cave, silent, arms crossed, watching you like a man sizing up a stone before trying to move it. He had a scar across one eyebrow, like a crack in pride. His robes were clean, his posture sharp, his jaw clenched with the kind of discipline that smells faintly of desperation. He did not bow. He did not speak. But he stood there for hours. When the rain came, he did not flinch. When the wind screamed like an angry ancestor, he did not leave. By dusk, his knees shook. By night, he collapsed. You still hadn't looked at him. The next morning, he returned. This time, he brought questions. They spilled from his mouth like arrows shot in the dark. Are you Bodhidharma? Are you human? Did you really stare at a wall for 9 years? Do you know the secrets of energy? Can you teach me how to break a stone with 2 fingers? Can you make me untouchable? You opened your eyes, just barely. He stepped back, not in fear, but in reflex, like someone who just realized a mountain might be awake. You said nothing, but your silence reached forward and poked him gently in the chest. The boy returned every day. He brought rice. You didn't eat it. He brought scrolls. You didn't read them. He brought flowers. They wilted at your feet without drama. And every day he asked again, "Will you teach me? Will you accept me? Will you just say something?" You remained still, not out of cruelty, but because answers given too early become locks, not doors. X. One day, he shouted, "Is this a test?" His voice cracked. "I've been coming for weeks. I've fasted. I've meditated. I've bowed to your shadow. I've beaten my own body into silence. You turned your head, just a fraction, toward the wall again. He took it as rejection. He screamed. He kicked a rock. He punched a tree until his knuckles bled. And then he left. Not down the path, just into the mist. Like a man walking back into himself, unsure which parts still belong to him. For 7 days, you sat alone again. The cave missed him. It wouldn't admit it, but the silence had gotten used to his chaos. You breathed. You watched the wall. You waited. And on the 8th day, you heard a sound you hadn't heard in a long time. A crunch of bone on stone, followed by nothing. You looked. He was kneeling, one arm missing, cut clean at the shoulder, wrapped tight in his own robes. His face was pale, but his eyes, they burned. Not with anger, not with madness, with clarity. "I offer you my arm," he whispered, "because my pride would not let me bow." You blinked. Once. The cave inhaled. The silence gasped. The wall softened. And you stood. For the first time in years, you stood. Not because you had something to say, but because someone finally listened. Poor. You walked toward him. You touched his forehead. It was hot, not with fever, but with intent. He bowed. The arm and the door. You never asked him to do it. You never demanded a sacrifice. You didn't even ask for a name. But he gave you his arm. And that, strangely enough, was not the real offering. The real offering was that he returned. Day after day, with one hand, pouring tea, sweeping the cave mouth, washing your robes in a frozen stream with his teeth, carrying wood on his back like a contrite ox. He never once asked you to teach him again. And that's when the door began to creak. Door. It wasn't a real door. There was no handle, no frame, no lock. Just the quiet understanding between two beings who had seen too much of themselves and finally stopped pretending otherwise. He would sit. You would sit. He would stare. You would stare. And between you, something began to stir. Not knowledge, not answers, just the smell of a new kind of stillness, one that had edges. At night, he would move his body, not out of restlessness, but out of rhythm. He would mimic the wind, mimic the fox, mimic you. He called it breathing with his bones. He did not know he was inventing something, but he was. And you watched. Your only correction, a raised eyebrow. Your only lesson, silence held just 1 second longer than comfort allowed. He began to understand strange things. That effort was sometimes the opposite of progress. That stillness was a form of movement. That the body, if listened to long enough, started teaching its own secrets. He learned to punch slowly, to breathe like a mountain, to bow not in submission, but in alignment. And he learned that discipline is not forged, it is revealed, like a statue hiding in the rock. One morning, he looked at you and asked, When will I be ready? You looked at the tea, then at his missing arm, then at the wall. You said, when you stop asking that. He did not speak for the rest of the year. One day, a second monk came. He brought questions, scrolls, pride. He bowed too deeply, smiled too quickly, spoke too loudly. You listened politely for 17 minutes, then turned to your student and said, "Sweep the dust from the entrance. The wind brought confusion." The monk did not return, but the wind did, and this time it carried voices, roamers, of a foreigner in a cave, of a boy who trained with shadows, of a style with no name that broke bones without anger. Farmer arrived, then a thief, then a soldier. All wanted something. All were sent away, not because you were cruel, but because not everyone is ready to be empty. One man stayed in the distance for 5 weeks, watching. On the 6th, he tried to mimic Hukai's movements. He fell, twisted his ankle, laughed. You nodded. The first lesson had begun. The cave now felt larger, not because the stone had changed, but because the silence now echoed between more than one mind. You spoke sparingly, a phrase every month, a gesture every season. But the energy thickened. It coiled in the bones. It cracked through fingers. It made the breath before the punch. There was no flash of lightning, no scroll handed down from the gods, no booming voice saying, "Begin." There was just a breath, and then a punch. But not the kind you know, not violence, not attack, not anger shaped like a fist. It was a gesture, a syllable of movement, a punctuation mark at the end of silence. And it changed everything. He had been moving for weeks. Your student, Hukai, with his one arm and a spine made of questions. He mimicked birds. He mimicked trees in windstorms. He mimicked you, though you had not moved in months. Sometimes he danced slowly, his sleeve trailing like forgotten thought. Sometimes he trembled like bamboo in snow. And sometimes he simply stood. But this morning, the mist still clinging to the stone like children to a mother's robe, he exhaled, and his body moved. It twisted, his hips anchored, his heel slid. His one fist, curled not in rage, but in rhythm, drew a circle in the air, and then struck. The air snapped like a breaking illusion, and for the first time, the cave blinked. You opened your eyes. The boy froze. "Was that wrong?" he asked. You said nothing, because words would only make it smaller. So instead, you breathed, and slowly moved one palm across your lap, as if brushing away dust from an invisible scroll. He understood. Not that it was right, not that it was wrong, but that it was noticed. Footsteps. Others began to arrive. Not students, not yet, but watchers. Travelers who heard of the cave, of the foreigner, of the boy. Some brought offerings, some brought arrogance. None stayed, but they watched. And one evening, a soldier on leave whispered, "Is that Kung Fu?" You didn't respond, but Hukai laughed. "No," he said, "that was just breath." The soldier returned to the capital and told the generals, "There is a boy in the mountains who punches the wind and makes it move." H. More came, some to learn, some to test. A merchant's son challenged Hukai to a duel. He agreed, not out of pride, but curiosity. They met in the clearing. No crowd, just you, the cave, and the silence. The merchant's son had form, sharp elbows, tension wrapped in silk. Hukai stood still, then bowed, and then breathed. His foot slid, his center dropped, his body coiled like poetry. And one movement, not fast, not loud, shifted the other boy's weight like a leaf caught in a wave. The merchant's son fell, sat up, stared at his hands, then bowed, confused. "You moved me," he said, "but I didn't see it." Hukai smiled. "You're not supposed to." NC. At night, you wrote nothing.
The Monastery of Falling Leaves. It didn't begin with blueprints, or stone, or monks chanting in chorus. It began with leaves, falling, one by one, like quiet decisions from the sky. You watched them for days. They spiraled down like regrets that had finally learned to dance. They landed without asking permission. And suddenly you knew this was the place. This was where silence wanted to stay. There was no gate, no bell, no altar, just trees, just sky, just soil soft enough to sit on and hard enough to bury your illusions in. Huike asked, "Is this it?" You said, "Not yet, but it's already begun." He frowned. "There are no walls." You smiled. "There are too many." He nodded, didn't ask again. Brick. The first temple was a circle of stones. No one knew who placed them. They simply appeared one morning, 12 of them, worn smooth by wind, arranged like a clock that refused to tick. That was where they sat, the first 4 monks, then 8, then 17. Not because they were invited, but because the leaves told them to. Fox. They brought with them stories, scars, dreams wrapped in robes. A man who had killed 3 generals, now kneeling beside a farmer who had never raised his voice. A widow who refused to speak, but breathed more deeply than any warrior. They all came, not to worship, not even to train. They came to unlearn. And you watched them, the way the wind watches mountains, not for movement, but for echo. Cave. Someone asked, "What is this place called?" Huike shrugged. Another monk said, We should call it the Hall of No Violence. Someone else said, Temple of the Quiet Fist. A boy sweeping leaves muttered, It's just the place where the leaves fall. And everyone fell silent. You said, Then that is its name. Shaolin, young forest, where nothing is forced, where nothing is named before it becomes real. Leaf, they began to build, but not from stone, from rhythm. A platform for sitting, a flat circle for moving, a fire pit shaped like a question mark. Someone carved a wooden post and called it the tree that teaches. Others struck it with their palms until blood became breath and pain became poetry. Walls rose slowly, but always with hesitation, as if fearing they might trap the wrong kind of silence. You let them build, but you warned. Never wall off the wind. It was here before us. Pray. By year's end, there were 30 of them. Some stayed in caves, some under trees. Some built huts so fragile a sigh could collapse them. But they weren't here for shelter. They were here for something that had no word. Not yet. You didn't give sermons. You didn't give ranks. But you gave them tea. Every morning, you prepared it with the same calm hands in the same chipped bowl. You poured for them the dreams of stone walls. It started with one monk. He dreamt of a corridor made of mist. Along its walls, names he had never heard, written in languages he did not know, but understood completely. When he woke, his hands were folded in a gesture no one had taught him. And his breath was still aligned with the rhythm of a temple that didn't exist yet. He told you this over morning tea. You nodded once, then poured more water. Because sometimes silence is a way of saying, keep dreaming. Then came the others, one by one. A woman with a shaved head whispered, I dreamed I was punching smoke, but the smoke remembered me. A former soldier said, I saw a wall. I struck it. It rang like a bell. A child, no older than 10, confessed through sleepy eyes. I walked into a temple made of stars, and you were there, but you were also gone. You did not record these dreams. You did not compare them. You did not say they were real, but you did listen, because listening is how you invite a temple to build itself through other people's sleep. Huike came to you late one night. He had not slept. His eyes were wide with something older than fear. I dreamed of a war, he said. Thousands of men, but they moved like dancers. Their swords never touched. They fought with breath. And when they fell into stillness. You asked, did you win? He shook his head. No one won. No one needed to. You nodded, then looked up at the sky, which at that moment was holding the moon so gently, as if even it needed to be rocked to sleep. Some monks stopped sleeping altogether, not out of anxiety, but curiosity.
They sat through the night, eyes open, watching their thoughts unfold like scrolls written in invisible ink. They were not meditating. They were remembering. Remembering something that had not happened yet. A monastery with carved halls, with stone lions, with drums that called nothing but breath. A place where children would one day train to strike with compassion and block with humility. You saw it too, not in dreams, but in the way the silence was beginning to echo differently. It no longer just absorbed sound, it reflected it, like the inside of a bell learning to sing back. One monk drew what he saw: a wide hall with red columns, painted beams, rows of monks punching in perfect silence, not for violence, but to keep the silence awake. Another sketched a courtyard, leaves swirling, a single old man in the center, smiling. Not you, he said, but also you. They were building Shaolin in their sleep. And you were the caretaker of the dream. But not all dreams were gentle. Some saw fire, floods, invaders.
The path of one finger. There are stories, whispers passed from monk to monk, from leaf to leaf, about the time you pressed your finger against stone and made it remember. They say the rock cracked. They say it wept. They say your fingerprint burned through centuries and now lives in a cave wall, shaped like a truth too still to fade. They're not wrong, but they're also not right, because that moment was not about the finger. It was about everything that came before it. You had been sitting for 7 days, still, breath even, eyes half closed, a bowl of tea untouched at your feet, now cold in stone. The monks watched from a distance. Even Hui Kei kept his questions to himself. They didn't know what you were waiting for. Maybe neither did you. But something had started to tremble, not in the mountain, but in you. Not shaking, not fear, a pressure, like an idea building behind the ribs. A pressure that had nothing to do with muscles and everything to do with listening. Then you opened your eyes, slowly, and reached out, not dramatically, not with flourish, just gently, as if touching the world for the first time. Your index finger met the cave wall and paused. There was no sound, no rumble, no light. But the monks leaned forward anyway, because something had shifted. The stone did not break. It softened, just enough, a dent, no more than a breath's depth. But in that moment, everyone felt it. The silence bent slightly, like it had bowed, and the stone, for the first time in its long, cold life, had yielded. Not to force, but to presence. You turned your hand over. Your fingers were ordinary, but your breath, It was 1,000 years long. Whirl. Later, they came to see the mark. One monk said, "You pressed with chi." Another said, "You transferred heat from years of stillness." A third whispered, "He didn't touch the wall touched him." You said nothing, because any explanation would only make the truth smaller. And besides, you had already moved on. Leave. The monks began experimenting. They stood in front of trees, holding their hands out until birds landed. They struck wooden posts not with force, but with stillness, waiting for the post to shift first. Some began training with one finger, balancing, lifting, pressing into air like it was a curtain. They didn't want power.
The visitor from the future. It began with a monk screaming in his sleep. Not in pain, in wonder. He stumbled from his hut at dawn, eyes wide, arms flailing as if still dreaming. He pointed at the sky, shouting. They were flying, people, in metal birds. They wore glass on their eyes and light in their hands. The other monks blinked slowly. One scratched his shaved head. Another muttered, "He's been drinking the rain again." But you watched him carefully, because you knew the signs. Dreams that don't feel like dreams. Images that arrive too early. He had seen something. Maybe not true, but not false either. In the days that followed, more monks began to speak of visions. One saw a city made of mirrors. Another heard voices through a box made of fire. One girl swore she saw people wearing all white, touching glass to summon food. A boy said, "I dreamed of a place where no one sits. They run all the time, but they don't know where." Huke, overhearing, laughed. "Sounds like a terrible monastery." You did not laugh, but your breath deepened, because time had started to leak. One afternoon, you sat with Huke beneath a willow. He poured tea. His one arm moved with grace, a rhythm practiced beyond pain. He asked, "Do you believe them?" You looked at the leaves trembling above you. "Belief," you said, "is just a refusal to wait for proof." He nodded, then smiled. "You're not saying yes, but you're not saying no." You sipped your tea, then said, "I am saying, if the wind can move mountains, perhaps a thought can move time." That night, you had a dream too. You stood inside a temple, but it was made of glass and steel. The monks wore shoes with glowing soles. They bowed to a wall that lit up and spoke back in your voice. You woke before dawn, not afraid, but slightly amused. The cave snored softly behind you. The trees whispered, "Strange guests are coming." And you nodded, because the future was not a place. It was a visitor, and you were already hosting it. One monk brought you a painting, crude but vivid. A long silver bird, people inside, clouds outside. He said, "This came to me after meditation, but it didn't feel like mine." You took the painting, studied it, said, "Not all visions come from within. Some are echoes traveling backwards." He asked, "Should we be afraid?" You shook your head. "Only if they expect us to explain it." In the weeks that followed, the monks began to adapt, not to technology, but to the idea of future. They created new forms, movements inspired by machines they'd never seen, punches that curved like satellites, stances as wide as a runway. One form, performed by candlelight, was called "the man who cannot sit still." Another was called "the thought that arrived too early." They didn't know what they were doing, but they did it well. Then one day,
The second silence. One morning, you were gone. No footprints, no note, no farewell gesture drawn in the ash of the fire pit. Just absence. So complete, it felt deliberate. The monks woke slowly, yawning, stretching, carrying tea bowls to the stone circle like always. It wasn't until the third bowl was left untouched that someone whispered, "Where is he?" No one answered, because already everyone knew. Huike didn't panic. He didn't shout. He simply sat in your usual place. Hands folded, one arm missing, breath even. The monks circled him like startled birds around a stump where once stood the oldest tree in the forest. Some wept, some smiled sadly, some looked to the sky, as if expecting to see your robes ascending like mist that had finally remembered where it belonged. But the sky remained ordinary, and that, somehow, hurt the most. At first, they thought you might return. You had disappeared before, for a week, for a month, once for an entire season, only to reappear beside a stream, offering no explanation and asking for none. But this felt different, because this time you had taken something with you. Not an object, not even your body. You had taken the first silence. The monastery felt louder in your absence. The birds sang more sharply. The breeze whistled through the pines like a song half forgotten. Even footsteps on stone seemed to echo too far. Huike stood in the center of it all, still, listening. Then he breathed in and breathed out. And with that single exhale, he returned something to the air, a stillness. Not as deep as yours, not yet, but enough. Enough to remind the leaves that they could fall without fear. Autumn. They called it the second silence, not to replace yours, but to honor it. A silence not born of your presence, but your departure. It spread slowly, through the halls, through the hills, through the bones of those who had once forgotten how to sit. Some monks began to speak less, others not at all. Not from sadness, from reverence, as if every word now had weight measured in your absence. Stories. They told stories of how you taught through stairs, of how you once bowed to a beetle crawling across your sandal,
of the time you spent a full hour watching two monks argue, only to afterward. Did either of you hear the bell? There was no bell. Huike began to write, not teachings, but moments, single lines. A punch is a question. The answer is breath. Stillness is not the absence of motion. It is the presence of choice. To hit with anger is to hit with your eyes closed. He never claimed these were yours, but the monks copied them anyway. Onto walls, onto wood, onto their own skin. Because the second silence needed something to wrap around. Deed. A visitor came from the capital, an envoy, curious, skeptical. He asked to meet the founder. Huike bowed. You just missed him, by several eternities. The envoy frowned.
The tea still steams. Your bowl still sits in the same place. A simple thing. No gold. No inscriptions. Just clay. Fired once. Held many times. And never washed with anything but silence. No one dares move it. But every morning, someone pours tea into it. The steam rises, swirls, disappears, and somehow you remain. This morning, it was a young monk's turn. She poured carefully, as if filling a memory. The tea hissed softly, not from heat, but from recognition. She placed the kettle down, stepped back, sat, and watched the steam, like everyone before her. A leaf drifted down from the rooftop. It had waited all night for this. A single red edge, curled, barely clinging to the season. It tumbled once, twice, and landed, gently, in your bowl. No splash, no sound, just a soft contact, like a bow without a body. The monks around the courtyard noticed, but none moved, because the leaf knew something they did not, that even now the tea was listening. Huike approached quietly. He had aged, not in bones, those were still hard as stone, but in eyes. He knelt by your bowl, stared into it, saw the leaf floating, felt the warmth still rising. Then he said, to no one in particular, "He's here." A novice tilted his head. Where? Huike pointed to the leaf. The way it rests, that's the teaching. Paper. Later that day, they asked him, "How long will we pour tea for him?" Huike thought, then answered, "As long as the leaf returns." The monks nodded, because they had all seen it, over the years, again and again. A leaf, always in autumn, always from above, always falling into silence. Book. The monks began to leave offerings beside the bowl, not out of worship, but conversation. A stone, a broken sandal strap, a poem, unfinished. Once, a child placed a tiny wooden figure, a monk with no face. She said, "He's thinking." They smiled, because that was exactly the point. A stone. Visitors arrived, asked about you. Where is the founder? Where is the master? Is there a tomb? The monks showed them the bowl, the steam, the leaf. Some scoffed, some stared. One woman cried. Later she whispered, "I felt him watching me, from nowhere, from everywhere." The monks said nothing, because steam does not explain itself. One night, snow came early, covered the courtyard like quiet returning. A novice walked out, bowl in hand, to perform the ritual. But the bowl had filled with snow, white, silent, still. He hesitated. Hueke appeared behind him. "You can pour," he said. "But the bowl is full." Hueke nodded, then smiled. "So is the world, but we still offer." The boy poured, and the steam rose, softly, through the snow. Not despite it, but because of it. Leaf. The leaf came again in spring. It was green this time. It landed in the tea unapologetic, as if saying, "I do not need to be old to bow." And the monks laughed, because now even the young things knew how to carry silence. Moon. That evening, Hueke sat before the bowl alone. He whispered, "I still hear you, even when I am the one speaking." The tea did not answer, but it steamed, just a little longer than usual, because it too had learned how to listen. You are still sitting. Somewhere, deep in the side of a mountain no map bothers to name, a cave remains. It is not visited often. The trees near it grow in strange spirals. The wind there speaks slower. Even moss forgets how to spread. Inside, there is a shape. It looks like a man, but not entirely. It is not carved, not sculpted, just impressed into the stone, like breath pressed so deeply into time that even time said, "I will keep this." The shape is seated, legs folded, spine tall, hands open. It faces a wall that does not blink, and the space between them vibrates. Not loudly, but like a bell that has been ringing for 900 years inside itself. The villagers say the shape belongs to a man who came from far away. A ghost, a monk, a silence wrapped in skin. They say he sat there so long his shadow refused to leave. That even after he vanished, the air still remembers how to hold his weight. That when you enter the cave and close your eyes, you can hear your own thoughts start to bow. Far below, Shaolin flourishes. The monks walk in quiet lines. They train. They teach. They bow to nothing in particular. And every morning, one of them pours tea into a bowl that no one dares clean. The steam still rises. Leaves still fall. Children still ask, "Where did he go?" And the answer is always the same. He didn't. Breath. You are not gone. You are not waiting.
You are not memory. You are sitting, still, in the shape of stillness, in the outline of a breath that never ended, in the hush between punch and purpose. The cave holds you, not because it must, but because it wants to, because you made silence a guest worth keeping. Peace. Sometimes a bird lands in the entrance, tilts its head, waits, then flies off, as if delivering your absence to someone who needs it. Sometimes a wanderer finds the place, steps inside, freezes, bows, then leaves, speaking less for the rest of their life. Sometimes no one comes, and the silence does not mind, because you are not teaching anymore. You are being, and in being, you teach still. Huke is gone now, but not really. His students walk the halls. Their students walk beyond the mountains. There are temples built of gold, and alleys where punches are thrown in your name. But here, in the cave, none of that matters. Because this is not legacy. This is origin, the first silence. And you are still sitting, still, breathing, waiting for no one, but ready for everything. Breath. And if someone were to ask, who is Bodhidharma? The best answer, as always, is a bowl of warm tea, a falling leaf, and a silence that listens back.